Okay, so, well, welcome guys. Let's start with a round of introductions. Everyone kind of knows who I am, so Larik, why don't you go first?
Yes, I'm Larik Jan Verschuren, CTO at Fundaments. Fundaments is a cloud service provider, sovereign cloud service provider. Our main business is about infrastructure as a service and all the other as a service thing you can think of, backup of service, DR. So that's in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you, Larik. And Miguel?
Hi, I am Miguel Gomez. I work at Telefónica Tech as Technical Product Manager for Virtual Data Center, which is our sovereign cloud based on VMware technology.
Thank you, Miguel. And Sverre.
Yeah, my name is Sverre Støkken. I'm a Sovereign Cloud Director in Orange Business. And yeah, basically my responsibility is to make sure that we have the sovereign cloud services that enables our customers to get flexible cloud services that they need and want, but with the sovereignty that their services and their customers require.
Brilliant. And Darren?
Yeah, I'm Darren Adcock. I work for Red-Centric Solutions Limited in the UK. We're an entirely UK-owned service provider. I'm responsible for the Sovereign Cloud. I'm the Sovereign Cloud Product Director.
Thanks, Darren. So I think we've heard a lot today, obviously, about Sovereign Cloud and, interestingly, a lot about innovation and how, this year really seems to be the year of innovation, the year when AI has stood up and made itself more known than ever before. And the year that we're seeing things like healthcare that Martin explained before, suddenly exasperating new challenges with the amount of data that we're going to be having to manage, how that's going to be used by governments and regulated industries. So this could be, perceived as a problem. Sometimes you're looking for innovation, but the problem with innovation is, you need it to be secure. You need it to be watertight. So, Sverre, let's start with you. So what kind of strategies does Orange Business deploy today to help balance the need for innovation and whilst managing security in a regulated environment?
Well, I think the big challenge with, well, first of all, innovation for us is kind of twofold. It's both providing the help to provide our customers with the innovation they need, but also for us to be innovative and innovate, continuously reinvent and improve on ourselves. And in the sovereign cloud environment, the kind of main challenge is that by nature it is more restrictive and it's smaller. So therefore you need to be able to scale your innovation accordingly. So we put a lot of focus on doing innovation locally and really close to our customers, and then putting a lot of resources on making sure that we can take that innovation that is done locally and close to our customers back centrally, and then do the necessary extra testing and automation to make sure that those services, if needed, are then pushed back to all of our sovereign cloud as a new service. So that's how we kind of balance the local versus central.
So it's a kind of a nurture process and then bring into the broader portfolio.
Continuous improvement.
Yeah. And Darren, how does Red-Centric handle sort of continuous improvement?
Yeah, similar challenge. There is a subset of data that's really secure and therefore has to sit in a different environment. So then how do we fit that innovation into a super secure environment is kind of the challenge. For us, it's kind of similar. We have a larger environment which is suitable for more commercial customers with less stringent requirements. So being able to use and develop and roll that out in there, get good at it, and then bring it in to the sovereign specific secure estates is kind of the best way for us to do it.
Yeah, so try it and see sort of thing, get it operational and then understand its boundaries, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Larik, how about you? How's the innovation fostered in Fundaments today?
Yeah, I think you have to go to the definition of innovation. If we look at our customers, as I see it, innovation is like doing cool stuff, things with data. You want to make things better, more efficient. So being like cloud service provider, we provide a platform for this data. So we ask their customers, do you know what your kind of data you have and what you do need to do to make sure that everything that's going to the platform is well guarded. So I'd like to see the sovereign cloud player that like an umbrella on top of that, because you don't want to be like a burden in the innovation phase with all kind of regulations. If you look at startups, those guys want to go fast forward, and you just want to place some guardrails to say, and it starts to get to know what kind of data there is. So it's like a journey, to say it like that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we've talked a lot about data today, and it really does start with data, doesn't it? It's data classification, data privacy, data sovereignty. So Miguel, how are you kind of supporting, maybe more around the research and development in these kind of innovations like AI, blockchain? How's Telefonica evolving the portfolio?
Well, Telefonica Tech was precisely created in 2020 to aggregate and foster Telefonica's business on cybersecurity, on cloud, on AI, on IoT, so in all these areas. So, for example, in blockchain, we've got TrustOS, that is our managed blockchain solution. It's, of course, available on the cloud with a sovereign option, and even for customers that want to have a more secure environment, there isn't even a dedicated infrastructure option. On IoT, for example, of course, being a telco company, we provide connectivity for IoT devices, but we also provide a full set of business analytics and business insights, including customer profiling, mobility profiling, etc., based on AI, and even our own AI suite for IoT solutions, again, based on our cloud infrastructure and with sovereign options. And in terms of AI, our platform has GPU acceleration capabilities in all of our data centers and edge nodes, and we have been conducting very interesting projects, for example, here in Barcelona or in Bilbao, computer vision, so yeah, a lot of action.
And when we're talking about AI specifically and some of the guardrails you mentioned earlier, the paradigm of kind of knowing what your data is at a point in time is now something that needs to become much more adaptable. How are you finding customers understand their data estates, particularly the massive explosion of data we're going to have, or we're having? The fact that developers don't really understand privacy very well, or some don't care about privacy. They want to get the code done and get it out the door. These are kind of serious concerns when you start looking at things like AI when it's writing its own code. How have you seen customers kind of face this challenge and this dilemma?
Well, I mean, people have always been aware that AI requires a huge amount of data to operate. But I think that people is now becoming aware that part of this data is very sensitive. And they are looking into secure options to store that data. And I also think that people is now becoming aware that AI can produce sensitive data out of non-sensitive data. And here I'm not only talking about new generative AI, but also more traditional AI approaches such as deep learning, machine learning, also have that effect. So I think that sovereign cloud is going to play a major role in the EU, particularly in the development of AI. And how do we cope with it? Well, on one hand, growing, because there's a growing demand, so we are growing as well. For example, we have added 2 data centers to our Spain sovereign cloud infrastructure this year, one here in Barcelona, another one in the Canary Islands. And also we are helping customers identify their infrastructure requirements and make the most out of infrastructure. So for example, in the past years, we have been conducting tests together with Intel and comparing inference performance on GPUs, on Xeon processor, on FPGAs. And we have seen that, for example, GPUs are not the most adequate acceleration for all kinds of inference workloads. So basically, we're orienting customers and helping them choose the right infrastructure.
Choosing the right infrastructure for the workload. Yeah, absolutely. And Sverre, let's talk about how Orange is looking at sovereign solutions which are leveraging things like AI and advancements made in those areas. How are you doing this while ensuring compliance and keeping aligned to data regulations?
Well, the big challenge when it comes to AI is making sure that we are secure both from the kind of making sure that we can both leverage the advance with AI and giving our customers the benefit of AI, but at the same time being secure against the threats that will also come with AI. And we have multiple organizations inside Orange who are really adept and have worked with AI and machine learning for a long, long time. And together with Orange Cyber Defense, they are really adept at facing that challenge. But that said, I don't think we are prepared. I don't think anyone are prepared, because no one really knows how the AI evolution is going to be. So I don't think that kind of potential risk can be overestimated. So in the end, we might risk up having a scenario where AI, the threats factor from AI become so huge that it can only be faced by AI security, and you end up in a situation where you basically have AI hackers facing AI security personnel, which is quite scary, and that is one of the things that I discussed at the AI safety conference last week or 2 weeks ago in London as well. So that's, as I see, the big challenge.
Yeah, and there's obviously a lot of good that can come from AI, but there's also, a lot of bad, as you say. And we're already at, a war of internet protocols firing against other countries and trying to take sites down and stuff, and that's pretty much business as usual. So there's a new business as usual we might have to contend with.
It's not as sci-fi as it used to be.
Yeah. And someone mentioned earlier systems of national importance, and systems that are required for healthcare, for blue light services and things like that. How is, Darren, to you, so how is AI being considered by organizations, governments, healthcare organizations via Ed-Centric, and looking at these advances in innovation? Also, how about keeping control on these things?
Yeah, so we're starting to see with the large data sets we've got, it's how can we actually harvest the value of those data sets. So, and really predictive is kind of the direction of travel where I think people are trying to go. As budgets get ever shrunk for the public sector in particular, they've kind of got to find a way of doing more with less, or doing more with less people. Also with policing, they really want to get additional people on the streets. So the more they can actually get AI to do that back office stuff, that investigative stuff that gets the policemen out where they need to be, then actually that's really good for police because they want to be visible. So that's kind of the direction of travel, what they're trying to achieve. From a data perspective, yes, because you've got data going in, which has a certain sensitivity, and then you have data coming out, and as you say, it may be could be much more sensitive depending on how it's then been collected and put together as an aggregated set. So I suppose the first thing you do is you make sure your network security is good. Secondly, you make sure you trust the people that are actually handling that data. So whoever's handling the data in and whoever's got access and capability to process the data coming out has the right credentials, has the right security clearances, the right background, so you can trust them. And then the other problem is who's classifying the data that's coming out. And that's maybe the next challenge is how do I then have maybe another AI tool that's saying, okay, try and do a balanced analysis of this output, and then, right, now I can classify it. Now I can put the right controls, I can mark it appropriately to who should have access, and maybe even distribute it only to those people.
So, yeah, 100% agree with you. And it seems that the actual requirements around security and governance and reporting are very, very stringent in these sovereign environments. You mentioned the word trust, and I want to kind of zoom into that. So in our VMware Sovereign Cloud initiative, we have very clear delineation of what we consider to be sovereign. Is the customer really kind of understanding, from Ed-Centric's point of view, what that actually means, and how are they looking at other cloud vendors and suppliers in context to that?
So, I mean, I have it on good authority from certainly somebody in who's actually in the MOD now and worked very highly in policing in the past. And he very much said there is certain data that will not go into the public cloud. It will not go outside of the sovereign type cloud, such as the one we're actually running for them.
So basically, there's levels of trust, right? And then we're not saying you can't use certain clouds. You by all means can. There's certain levels of bring your own key, managing your security versus full air gaps, sovereign environments.
Yeah.
Okay, and Lorik, with the EU continuously evolving their regulation, and one day the Data Act, I'm sure, will actually be legislated, and privacy regulations like GDPR. How is Fundaments planning on keeping ahead and keeping the compliance requirements, happy?
It's a good question. We heard a lot that's what's coming at us. Huh? There's a lot of acts being created and guidelines coming out of that. What in the end of the day, what it's about is keeping your service as transparent as possible. If you look at three things like technology, people, process, and if you have your guidelines up or your quality as high as possible, you can do there. Then the match from we are in the foundation of the service, being a cloud service provider. So if quality is high there, and regulation comes from above, then you will find the right match. Of course, you have to do a lot of homework and study of what's coming up. But we try to be the best in the end if we look at people, process, technology, and then match it from there.
And how do you see the kind of ecosystem developing in that respect as well? I mean, I know a lot of your customers are actually partners, right? So
the different partners there, and the question was, do they actually know what to do? It's always the awareness that was mentioned by you. I think we're really in a journey about thinking about how to handle data. And that's the whole point. So we have to do a lot of talking with them and educate them in how to govern data in the end. So
not only from a European standpoint, but also a Dutch standpoint.
Yeah.
So a lot of the legislation we've talked about has been European-wide regulation. Obviously, individual countries have their own individual policies, which the EU endorses and asks them to do, which will layer on top, let's say, of the current EU regulation. And one of the things I find interesting is we talk about AI, we've talked about lots of different things. We talk about a digital Europe and a digital circular economy, which is what the EU is driving for. This means that we're going to have cross-border kind of flows of data, and we're going to need to understand where the data's come from, what the data contains in terms of privacy information, what the classification of it is, but also kind of make it transparent enough so we can actually exchange it securely and monetize it. So Miguel, given that we have to get to this point where we can exchange, and there's various frameworks being looked at for each different kind of industry vertical, how do you envisage the facilitation of cross-border data flows whilst maintaining compliance under an EU data sovereignty rule?
Well, first I have to say that I like very much the question, because it somehow breaks the misconception that sovereign cloud is like a secure vault where you put your data and you lock it down there forever to rot and you never use it. I mean, people want to use sovereign cloud as any public cloud, and they need to store data, to process data, to exchange data. Just like in any cloud. So as you mentioned, data flows and data exchanges are important. We of course enable them, and we put Telefónica's communication network at the service of our customers to be able to perform those exchanges. But the key in sovereign cloud is making sure that information only flows in the right direction. So for example, a sovereign workload can and may need to have access to information is stored outside of the EU. And that's perfectly fine. What cannot happen is that information in a sovereign domain flows unauthorized and uncontrolled out of the EU or out of the jurisdictional boundaries that the customer wants to maintain.
The jurisdiction.
Yeah.
One point. Yeah.
So that's what we enable and that's what we empower. And for some very specific customers, we have even implemented dedicated and specific security mechanisms to make sure that those data flows are in place.
Yeah, okay, so we've got a data flow, but then we've also got like compliance of the data as well, and making sure that the environment is compliant to the regulation for that particular vertical or certification. So Sverre, what do you guys do in Orange to kind of help customers with demonstrating compliance in their sovereign cloud?
Well, for us, the sovereignty is kind of native for us because we have grown out of an organization where we have always provided our customers with managed cloud services from our own local data centers, owned and operated by ourselves, with local personnel on the ground in all the regions where we have provided our services. So we are by nature sovereign in that sense. So we are now providing our services in kind of two different sovereignty stages, EU sovereign or country-specific sovereign, which is what we have done for 20 years, basically. We have always had the kind of customers who have had really sensitive data and have demanded that that data is stored locally and operated locally.
So an EU level of sovereignty and a regional level of sovereignty, both being obviously the regional one being more, I guess, than the EU level, is that?
Yeah, I think that's really important when it comes to sovereignty. You can't really discuss sovereignty without first defining what kind of sovereignty area you want to have, because in the end, it's the whole concept of sovereignty is making sure that all your data is stored and only accessible. All the data and metadata is only accessible inside of that region. And also that you have that all your dependencies are controlled inside of that region. And I think especially the dependencies and making sure that all those dependencies are controlled inside that region is not necessarily being made clear when you see the discussion in the media. It's all about the worries that someone outside of that country or Europe could potentially access the data. But it should be just as concerning that someone outside that region could potentially shut off the service. So not only them potentially being able to access your data, but them also being able to restrict your access to the data, which could be even more catastrophic.
Yeah, well, we've all seen that with malware, right? And so you mentioned residency and data residency being a key component, not the one and only thing for sovereignty, but a component of sovereignty. The two are often confused. What sort of guarantees do you provide around residency, and how do you do that with your customers?
So we guarantee that the data is stored locally and that the platforms and the data solutions are operated for the service that we provide is operated then only by local personnel, if that's what they needed. We also have customers where the sovereignty area for them is even smaller, that they demand that the data should only be on a platform restricted to within a room and operated by a named number of personnel with a specific security requirement, for instance.
Yeah.
So we don't define that as sovereignty, but in reality, it's just sovereignty taken one step further.
It's a highly restrictive environment, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
And I guess we have, when we're looking at residency, we have some interesting kind of evolutions going on here. We have things like high availability in DR, which can affect residency. We have things like edge, which certainly can be a solution and can also affect residency. And Darren, I mean, edge, we've seen a lot of talk about edge, particularly around sovereignty, and how edge can be an intrinsic part and play an intrinsic role in running your workloads within location. How do you see edge kind of moving forward with sovereign?
I guess it's getting out there in the field and getting the data from as many places as you can. Certainly in UK policing, moving the edge into cars. There's other pitches about that here this week. As a Red-Centric being a big network provider on 5G networks as well, we're actually able to help with the security of the network and the people running and administering the networks. In the same way as you said about bringing the service down, a denial of service attack, well, we've actually got the network part of that as well. So it's actually thinking just beyond the edge, but the bit of glue that connects the edge back to the data center.
Yeah, I mean, the network is an incredibly important component. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think in that scenario, I think you could see sovereignty as two different factors as well, that you could have local, really, really local sovereignty for the data locality on the edge solution, but you could potentially then have the operation done within a larger sovereignty area. So for some instances, it could be, for instance, important that the data locality and the solutions are kept really, really local, but operation could be done inside of Europe, for instance. So I think going forward, the sovereignty definitions are going to be more flexible than what they are currently.
Do you think that there will be levels?
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I think that there are going to be more sovereignty areas than what are currently available.
Yeah.
I think ultimately it needs to be a scale. There needs to be some recognition of complete air-gapped, highly restricted secure environments versus, like I said, key managed public clouds, bring your own key type thing. And it's the right placement of the workloads, and having all those options available, like you all do, to your customers is what kind of makes it unique as a provider. They can come to you and receive the right advice and guidance about which clouds should be used for that particular workload and how that operates. So Miguel, just looking at the kind of different data residency options within the EU, how do you deal with your customers, particularly if they're like multinational customers? How do you work with them to ensure that they've got the relative controls in place of residency?
Well, what we do resonates to what RedCentric and Orange have just presented. What we do first is, as a multi-cloud company, we've got our own sovereign cloud platforms, but we also have partnership agreements with the main hyperscalers, so we can offer a full range of cloud options. So what we first do is we get in touch with our customers, we help them classify their information and define the requirements for each of these data classes, and then we help them choose the appropriate cloud solution for each of those data categories. In some cases, that may be just a hyperscaler, in some cases, hyperscaler with additional security mechanisms, and when a sovereign cloud is required, we've got our own platforms, and as was mentioned before, we have multiple data centers within the EU so that they can have, even if they need business continuity, backup, disaster recovery solutions, they can make sure that their data will be always in the boundaries of the EU, and even that they can choose the specific region where the data is going to be stored. In some cases, that is due to sovereignty requirements. In other cases, more due to performance requirements.
Yeah. You mentioned data classification, and Darren, I know we were talking earlier about classification and how and classification is fine at a point in time, but then it changes, and we also need new classifications for industrialized data, which go beyond kind of the standard privacy stuff that's available today. Miguel, so how are customers understanding their data classification? Is that something that you're seeing that evolving to really fit in and underpin some of the regulatory requirements that have been seen in those industries and those businesses?
It depends very much on the customers, because, for example, public entities, government bodies, this data classification is brought to them by law. So basically, they don't have much to think in that space. Everything is done for them, and everything is clear and ready. Customers from regulated sectors have their sector regulations that they need to comply to, and they are more or less bound to those regulations, and they have less leeway. And then we've got private customers from unregulated sectors that are only bound by some very generic regulations, for example, GDPR, etc. And there they have much more leeway. And those are the ones that can be more creative and can adapt over time and can evolve. Others, unfortunately, are very tightly bound to those very specific regulations.
Yeah, I mean, anyone want to comment on the kind of the data explosion and how that's going to affect data classification, and just kind of thinking out loud on what impact will a massive amount of data growth have on classification? It will have to be a continuous classification exercise. Systems and tools will be required to do that. Beyond today, like the standard privacy scanning tools that just look for credit card information or email addresses.
I really think it's a starting point. If you look at building the right cloud platform, using the right cloud platform, it starts with where's my data, how is it growing, how can I classify it, and from there take the next step. What is the regulations there? The private customers, they have probably their own regulations instead of that government is pushing or that EU is pushing on. You get a mix out of a lot of data, and it has to be positioned on the right cloud in the end. And that's where the complexity comes in. And every country has its own certification on that, and so it has all come together in the end.
I think there's a lot of enablement we need to do as well, particularly in the developer community, getting them to understand what the data is that they're manipulating or what they're asking AI potentially to manipulate with models. So there's going to be a new kind of challenge I foresee with customers and actually trying to grapple and get to grips with that. Okay. So we heard a lot from our EU colleagues earlier around the regulatory legislation that's coming into play, and we have things like the Data Act, which is really around unlocking that valuable data, choice, flexibility, getting rid of egress fees, all the fantastic things that we want. EU cybersecurity certification, EUCS, around securing that valuable data, and effectively locking out non-national kind of clouds. DORA is another interesting one, Digital Operation Resilience Act, and potentially what could happen with the national NIS2 could expand out beyond finance into other kind of areas, demanding that there's resiliency, not just in the company, but in the supply chain of the company as well. And AI Act, I mean, that's just a starting point, just saying, hey, systems of national importance, don't put them under AI quite yet until we know what we're doing. But Darren, what are your thoughts on kind of the Data Act? And if you were to zoom in on one kind of standout complexity that you think is going to be a real challenge with this, what would it be?
I'd say the portability requirement is really going to drive a lot of challenges. I see them as twofold. I think there's a technical challenge, which is if I want to move my data freely from one provider to another, how are we able to actually facilitate that technically? Are we all running to a common standard to actually make that a bit easier? That's just on the infrastructure side. Then obviously you've got to have data standards as well to make it portable, to actually share data, as we said before. I think the other challenge for service providers particularly is in terms of that collaboration that's going to be required. Earlier on there was a mention of UK Cloud going bankrupt. They're not the only provider to go bankrupt in the UK as a result of the financial crisis and other pressures from likes of Amazon, Azure, etc. And I think that's going to drive more customers looking to spread their risk, which means they're going to want to start running applications across multiple suppliers, probably at the same time, actually splitting the workload. So that's going to need a lot of collaboration between those service providers and indeed the customers and any application providers.
So you're talking about the change from having applications running in one environment to really, I guess, the smart cloud approach or cloud smart approach of having distributed applications running database in one place, application processing in another, and potentially having the whole kind of application distributed.
Yeah, and we've already got customers asking for the ability to actually move the workloads between 3 different suppliers.
Yeah.
They want that level of risk taken care of.
Yeah, exactly. And Miguel, EUCS, so the cybersecurity certification, I mean, this has some really kind of helpful capabilities. We talked about this when we had our brief. And what do you think is one of the good things to come out of EUCS that will help customers really understand what it's all about?
Well, I think it's going to be, I personally think that it's going to be very positive because right now sovereignty and sovereign cloud is a subjective concept, right? So it's like saying that you're handsome. I mean, you can have a very high self-esteem, but then you have to go out to the market and see if you can build consensus around that claim, right? So that is how we operate at the moment in terms of sovereign cloud. But UCS is going to bring some objective, specific criteria. So you will no longer say, I am a sovereign cloud. You will say, I am UCS, CS, CL3, UCS, CS, CL4, etc. So customers will be able to choose paying attention to objective criteria instead of to subjective marketing terms. That is what we are doing right now.
So kind of like buying a fridge and having the level of kind of greenhouse gas protocol. Yeah. So nice and easy, you can see straight away. Yeah, that's a great thing that's going to help it become a lot easier to understand, like you say, the overused term of sovereign. And Sverige, the EU-US data privacy framework, and it's been updated now and to ensure the safe flows of data between European countries and the United States. What implications do you think this can have for kind of multinational corporations with operating across the EU and the US and their jurisdictions?
Well, it goes a long way to kind of clarify the legality of doing that data transfer for the time being. That said, I don't think that necessarily the last word has been said. So I think that it's important for both those multinational but other companies as well to make sure that they are future-proof and not just look at the current legislation and the current requirements, but make sure that they have a strategy that makes sure that they are compliant even if those regulations and laws are going to change, which I really think they are going to. And the intention behind the current work from EU is, I think, to be more protective, to make sure that they have control over the infrastructure and the know-how and the competency that they need to make sure that they can provide their citizen, which is really their task in the first place, with the services that they deem critical. They need to have a conscious view on what kind of capabilities they need inside of EU. And seeing that as intention, we need to kind of then envision what that is going to realize itself in terms of rules and regulations going forward, and try to work according to that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dilemma for multinationals, certainly how they become, if they're dealing with financial information, for example, how they maintain sovereignty, residency, operational control within their regions. And that's certainly a big challenge for multinationals. And going forward, as you say, you've got to be ahead of the game in terms of what's potentially coming down the line, how it will affect your business, and make the right choices now rather than later on. Yeah.
Ending up in a situation where you have to do something, where you have to migrate data, you have to change your IT policy, is really painful. It's going to be really, really expensive.
Yeah, exactly. It could be a game finisher for a business as well.
It could, and it has been for a lot.
Yeah. And in that, right, I mean, protecting yourself, I mentioned earlier, Dora and Larika, I know we've talked about this, right, the Digital Operations Resiliency Act, so providing protection for financial institutions, obviously, in the event of catastrophic failure. But there's a chance that it could be expanded under NIS2 from 2024 onwards, and this could significantly affect a lot of organizations, customer organizations. What do you think the implications could be if this does expand?
Well, I think it's a good thing in the end, because customers, in the end, they see cloud as a service and don't actually they think by default that it's secure. So if there's some regulation and everyone is challenged on that, then I think the quality will increase in the end of governing the data that's in the cloud. So yeah, I think if I compare it in the Netherlands, we have care and cure as a and if you look at, our government has been pushing from years on the cure part to do things right, and the care is behind on that. So you see that there's a momentum also with guidelines like NIS2, that quality goes up in the end. So,
I think you make a good observation, right? People assume, and we all know what assumption means, but people assume that cloud is secure, and unfortunately, a lot of the times this is a false assumption. Yeah, so definitely. You're right, it will drive the quality up. I think a lot of these regulations, and certainly the drive and knowledge that sovereign is key, and sovereign is important, is going to help drive the quality of cloud services and solutions and security, naturally. Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate the panel. Hope this was educational, informative, or fun listening. Thank you.